I'll be ready for part 2.
So I realised after my last unhaul video that I actually own multiple copies of some of my Lizzie McGuire books. Apparently owning multiple copies of books has been an issue since childhood. That does bring our unhaul count up another 3.
We're going to go for the books on the sides of the couch and maybe at the top, just so I can keep this throne set up for a little while longer. I'm a bit attached. The first 2 books I have here are both by Mark Lawrence. They are part of the book of the Ancestor trilogy. This is an adult fantasy series. I've only read book 1. I don't own book 2, but I own book 3. I own book 3 because I did find it in a charity shop, but I think I bought it before I'd started book 1, and I read book 1 and I didn't like it. Yeah, I'm not going to continue, so I'm going to unhaul these. I'm getting rid of this book, Clade by James Bradley. I read this book I think back in 2020, and it was quite a freaky time to read this book because a lot of the content in this book felt very related to 2020, even though this book was written, you know, years prior. I think that this book had much more of an impact on me when I read it because of the time I read it, and I really enjoyed it and I really highly recommend this, but I just don't think I'll ever reread this. The 100-year-old man who climbed out the window and disappeared. This is one of those books that I thought sounded much more exciting than it actually was, and I don't think I liked the type of quirky this book was. I also have here The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. I have got something on this. I don't know what it is. It looks like food. It is probably food. I'll have to wipe that off before I give it away. I didn't like this one that much. I found the main couple not to be particularly interesting. Their whole conflict and setup just felt very juvenile, which is interesting because I recently read, I don't even remember the name of the book, but it's by Ashley Winstead. I can remember the author's name at least. That book has a very similar setup to this, where we have 2 people who have to work together and they have quite a, you know, rival, enemies sort of relationship in a workplace setting, and then they end up having a romance. But I really preferred that one. I felt like their conflict was a lot more believable and less juvenile, even though the main character was quite like immature, but I felt like it was quite realistic, and I think it was also done in a way I related to personally, so I just very much enjoyed that book a lot more over this one. And yeah, I just wanted to recommend it here because it's very similar setup in terms of these 2 plots, but I just think this one wasn't as well as executed as the other one. I also have this really pretty edition of The Nightingale by Christian Hannah. This is another book I read and I actually didn't like this one. I don't think I like World War II stories. I also have The Light Between Oceans. This is another book I've read, and I think I liked this more than The Nightingale. It's definitely more memorable. I loved this book because the setup of it was very interesting. We kind of have this couple who live on this like tiny island with the lighthouse, and the man in the relationship, he is the lighthouse keeper essentially. They're trying to start a family of their own and they can't, and then one day this baby just like rocks up on the shore and they decide to keep this child and raise her as their own. And this book ends up being about the consequences of those decisions, and I always really enjoy books where it is about consequences. I think it makes for a very fascinating and gripping story. I'm getting rid of these 3 Neil Gaiman books I own. I don't know if I've confessed this, maybe I have like a long time ago in another video, but I don't think I like Neil Gaiman's books. Also, I just remembered these aren't the only 3 I own. I definitely own a Nancy Boys somewhere, which I may have kept to reread. Or did I put it here? No, I've got Nancy Boys. American Gods. I'm pretty sure I own American Gods. That's the one I mean. Back to my confession. Yeah, I don't know if I like Neil Gaiman. I am keen to give him another go because all his concepts are very, very intriguing to me. And my favorite movie of all time, like the movie I'm always rewatching when I need a comfort watch, is Stardust, which is based on his book Stardust, which I swear I was unhauling. Oh, but I mustn't have put it in the pile of these books. Oh, that's going to be annoying. It's going to come up. I tried to organize these so that I wouldn't have this issue, but it was going to happen. Well, I'm not sure where it is, but I'm pretty sure Stardust is somewhere in this pile. With his other books, I've read A Nancy Voice, and I didn't realise that this is the sequel to American Gods until I finished it. So, huge mistake on my part. I probably would have gotten much more enjoyment out of this book if I'd read the first book. You know, maybe we'll come back, but this is a library edition I found secondhand, so I've always kind of thought to myself that I will get rid of it because I don't particularly like this edition. Then I also have this book of his, Trigger Warnings, which I believe is a collection of short stories. I haven't read this and I don't really plan to. I think with Neil Gaiman I will try some of his full-length novels, and then if I do end up loving them, like if my tastes change or whatever, then I'll come back and read this, but short stories aren't really my favorite thing. And then I also have The Ocean at the End of the Lane, which I also didn't really love. Bottom line is, I'm not sure if Neil Gaiman's for me. I'm going to try American Gods because I'm pretty sure I own that somewhere. And I'm also very much interested in reading Neverwhere. That one sounds cool. There's like an underground city in London. Okay, I'm getting rid of my copy of The Wind-Up Girl. I have read this. I read this a few years ago and I was so excited for this book. It's set in this world that's really been dried up by humans. We follow this man who comes across this like basically sex doll that's like alive and is an AI, has been programmed as a sex doll, and it's just about that and his relationship with this sex doll in this like dying world that's like set in a place based off Thailand. I loved the setting. I hated the concept. I was really quite like disgusted and uncomfortable, and I think there was probably a much more like deeper meaning and understanding I was supposed to get from this, but I was just like too disgusted at the time when I read this that I couldn't comprehend what the author was trying to convey. So I'm getting rid of this. I don't think I'll reread this. I am kind of interested in another series by this author. I think it's about pirates. I can't remember the title. Did anyone ever read these? I've got The Tiger's Curse and then I've got the sequel, Tiger's Quest. Read book 1, I never read book 2. It's essentially about, I don't even remember, I think a girl who gets entangled with a prince who's been cursed and turned into a tiger. That's it. I don't know. I can't remember anything else. I have some more books from my like angel phase that I never read when I was a teenager, and that is, I don't know which one's book 1. I think this one's book 1, Dark Angel, and then we've got Twisted Heart. No idea what these are about. I haven't read them. Don't think I will ever. I have these books, all part of one series. This is the Land of Stories series. This is book 1, The Wishing Spell by the guy who is on Glee. I loved this series and I read them as an adult. I think they're so much fun. It's basically about these two kids who end up falling into the world of like fairy tales, and then they run into all the fairy tale characters we know. Like in this world, Red Riding Hood is like a queen after she'd like killed the wolf. I really love retellings, but I think my favorite retellings are ones where characters from fairy tales interact with one another. I think it's so fun. It can make so many interesting dynamics come to life. I just don't see myself rereading these, and I feel like someone else can get joy out of them. So that's what we're doing. We're passing these along. I have a whole bunch of books by Tamara Weber. My favorite books by her when I was a teenager were these ones, and it's a companion series. Which one's the first one? I want to say this one's the first one, Between the Lines, and it's essentially about these two co-stars who end up falling in love, and yeah, about their like relationships. And then I think we also follow some of their like friends who end up having relationships. I really liked these back in the day, but I don't think I would now as much. They're not my kind of book, and I am happy to pass these along. Like, they gave me good memes when I read them as a teenager. It's time to say goodbye and thank you, I guess. Yeah, I have this tiny little book that I believe is a play I was meant to read for school though I never read. Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett. It's so cute and little though, isn't it? I have this book, Puberty Blues, which I feel like you're not going to get this reference unless you're an Aussie, but this was a like hugely popular book, I believe in the 70s, and then they released a TV show, I want to say around like 2012, and I loved the TV show. It's essentially just about like these two friends navigating like boys in high school in the 70s. But I read this, really did not like the book. Did not like that book at all. I'm also getting rid of my copy of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. The whole time I read this, and I think I was talking about it on my channel, I kept saying Mr. Norrell's name is Mr. Norrell, which I don't think is right. Like, let me know if I'm still wrong. Like, please. I need help. This is by Susanna Clark, and I read this probably 2 years ago now. I didn't like this. It was like such an effort to get through, first of all because of its size, but I was so much more excited about this book when I was starting it than when I finished it. It's essentially about these like two musicians in some point in England. Like, I'm really bad with my English periods, so that's why I said some point in England. I'm trying to figure out from the back. Okay, so England's at war against Napoleon in this. We've got these two musicians, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. They're kind of at war against one another to be the better person, or be the better musician in this case. Like, who's the best of the best. I've got all these like little notes. My note says, reading this book is like watching paint dry. Yeah, I really didn't like this. I thought the beginning was much more interesting because essentially this like lady who dies and she's brought back to life, and then like I think there's like some sort of dealings with the devil, is there? I could be so wrong on that, so don't trust that with the devil part. I don't know, but it was very interesting. I believe there was like consequences for her death, and I thought she was going to be a more significant character to the story than she was, unfortunately. And yeah, I just did not care for all these men trying to figure out who has the bigger dick. That was basically this book. I'm getting rid of my copy of The Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins. I actually have a story about this book I want to share. I have never completed this book. I started reading it when I was working in a bookshop, and I think I was only a third or halfway through this book. Some lady came into the bookshop, and then she was chatting with my boss. They were just like discussing thrillers just casually, and then she goes, starts talking about this book, and she says, "I can't believe," and I'm sitting at the desk, at the counter, like, you just spoiled that book for me. You just spoiled this book for me. And I was so cranky about it. And obviously, as an employee at this place, I couldn't tell her off, or I think I was also just so shocked that she had just said it in a bookshop. Who goes into a bookshop and in their right mind says a spoiler of a book out loud, especially a book that was really like popular that year? Like, this year was the year this was really popular, I think. So that's my story behind this book and why I DNF'd it. It was not the book's fault. It was just, I knew what was going to happen, and I was so bitter and so angry that I couldn't continue, and to this day have never continued, and I don't think I will. I haven't even watched the adaptation. Perhaps I'll do that. Anyway, moral of the story, kids, don't go to bookshops and say spoilers out loud. Don't do it. Don't do it. I got so ramped up then. Oh my god. Is that Stardust? That is Stardust. I finally found it. But yeah, that's going to. I originally got it from the charity shop. How much did I pay? $1. Okay, I'm also getting rid of my copy of Sci-fi by Neil Schusterman. I actually really enjoyed Sci-fi. I didn't, unfortunately, like book 2 and book 3 as much as this first book, but the concept overall, very, very fascinating and unique. I have all these books here by Orson Scott Card. I've got the Seven Sons series. I've got a few books in that series. And then I also have Ender's Game. I think I've only read these two. I really liked Ender's Game. This was my first book I ever read by him. I really enjoyed this. That made me want to pick up this book, which I did like, but I didn't love. And I was, you know, silly and bought the next few books in the series at the same time I'm buying the first one. So haven't read these. I don't think I ever will. Like, maybe if I ever get the desire to, but I don't feel like I need to keep them, even if I do end up reading them down the track. You know, there's libraries, there's ebooks, there's other means of reading these without having to physically own them. I'm getting rid of my copy of Milk and Honey. I feel like so many people are reading this these days and it's really popular, and I did like it when I read it. I feel like you just read this once and you'd have it, but I personally never go back to reread or to even look at this. I have this non-fiction, When Breath Becomes Air, which I did read and I think I liked, but I don't really remember too much other than it was quite sad. I have this book I've never read and it's in Japan, The Crickets Cry. I think it's just about a guy who was a prisoner of war in Japan during wartime. I'm getting rid of Before I Die by Jenny Downham. This, I feel like, was such a popular book when I was a teenager. It was one of the first like sick lit books I ever read. I feel like everyone read it like at a time, or everyone that I went to school with at least read it, you know, in my circle, I guess. I also have Cracked Up to Be by Courtney Summers. I did read this a long time ago. I do not remember a single thing. I have Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. I started reading this when I was like in year 9. I was like way too young for this book about a divorcee going on a self-discovery journey, essentially. I have this book, Where Things Come Back, that I honestly do not remember much, but I can remember I bought this and read it because of Jesse the Reader. He used to love this book. I have my Mary Kate and Ashley books. Used to love them, used to love their movies. What icons, seriously. But yeah, time to say goodbye to these. I have this book, Disgrace, that I did have to read for a lit class and I was just so not interested about this. It's basically like a middle-aged man who has an affair with a student at the beginning and then he gets caught out and sent away, I think. I have this edition of World War Z that honestly I've never read because I got it secondhand, and then after I bought it I realized how gross it looks. Like, it just looks really dirty. I never read it. Zombie horror is like my favorite kind of horror. I watch every single friggin' zombie movie, TV show, whatever trashy things out there. Like, even not, I shouldn't call it trashy actually. Some of it is so solid and good content. But I've never really read any oh, that's a lie. I have read some zombie apocalyptic books. I can think of one, so I won't say some, but I've read at least one, and I wanted to read more, and I wanted to read this, but this edition disgusted me too much, so I haven't done it. I have this book, which I know is book 2 in a series. Have I read book 1? No. Have I ever owned book 1? No. I have this random book from childhood. One side of it says Amy and one side of it says Jade. And I know I got this and read this when I was probably like 7 years old because my best friend when I was a kid was called Amy. And then I had a cat who I named Jade. Actually, funnily enough, my cat Jade was named after the Bratz Jade because Jade was always my favourite Bratz. So there you go. That's why I own this book. I know I read it. Couldn't tell you anything about it. I have these Mitch Albom books, both of which I've read. I've got Tuesdays with Maury. I think I did quite like this, but I don't remember much. And I've got The 5 People You Meet in Heaven. I have my Narnia collection. I've had this since I was, I want to say I got it in year 5, maybe year 4. I have tried to read the series multiple times in my life. Like, since childhood I started it and then I stopped, and then I tried to reread it again as a teenager, I think, and then also as an adult. Never completed. I don't think it's going to happen. I think the furthest I've gotten, these aren't even in order the way I'm showing them to you, I want to say the furthest I've gotten is book 5. So I mean, actually that's not too bad. It means I just haven't finished the last 2, but I just never loved this as much as I wanted to, as much it was like praised and hyped. It's been a series I've been excited to try and read since childhood, and I feel like a lot of older adults in my life read them as kids and loved them, and I wanted to share that love, but it ain't for me. I'm getting rid of my copy of June, which again, another book I found in the charity shop. I really like how many books I've found from charity shops. I feel like it justifies the amount I have. Like, it doesn't, but like in my head, it kind of does. Was it last year the movie came out? Because that was the year I read this. Yeah, last year. I just didn't love this. I like to give classic books a go, like classic sci-fi, classic fantasy, but I don't personally find them the most accessible reads. And I also don't love them as much because what I love about sci-fi and fantasy is what they've always given to me in these like modern stories. Themes and characters that I personally relate to and that I think are really fascinating and interesting, whereas there's not as much in these older ones, you know? So yeah, happy I read it. I'm happy I can say I can read it. Like, that's a bit of a flex, you know? Isn't it? Kind of. But I don't plan to ever continue. I haven't even watched the movie still, actually. I have a couple of school books. Animal Farm, which I did read. And then I have Of Mice and Men, which I actually did not read. This was my brother's school book. He gave it to me, or I might have stolen it because I thought I always wanted to read this. But I don't know if I do anymore. So I'm just going to unhaul it because it's just been sitting on the shelves collecting dust for way too long. Do I just confess that I found a spider? It's tiny. I won't show you because I feel like that will trigger people. Oh, it's running, it's running. Oh, she's gone. I don't know where she's gone. Okay, let's carry on. I'm getting rid of this series by Michael J. Sullivan. 3 books that I actually bind up, so technically I'm holding 6 books in my hand right now. I enjoyed this series. It's a fantasy series that I think is very easy and accessible to people who are looking to get into adult fantasy, but it's nothing spectacular, nothing that I think I would reread because it's just very standard, very fun, but very standard, I would say. And I don't mean to say that in a degrading way. I hope it's not coming across like that. I have Solitaire by Alice Osman. I got this because it was really popular on Tumblr. That's why I brought this. I have read a few Alice Osmans now. Or a few. I probably read this, and I think I've read... What's the other really popular one that everyone loves and I didn't love? Editing Nicole helped me remember, but I don't think Alice Osman is for me. I'm getting rid of my copy of Holes. This I know I also got from a charity shop. I love the movie of this. Like, it's always been one of my favorites since I was a child, and I think I read this book when I was a teenager because I wanted to see what the original text was like, and I think I liked it, but still the movie is just like so good. If you haven't seen it, you're really missing out. Like, one of the best Disney movies of our time, dare I say. I am also getting rid of, oh my god, I just realized, okay, I'm getting rid of this book, Ashes, and you'll see why I just said, oh my god, but this is kind of like a zombie apocalypse book. So the one I was thinking that I'd read when I was talking about World War Z before is not these ones. It was another one that I read. So I've read a couple, I can say. I've read a couple. I loved this first book, Ashes. I read it as a teenager. I have actually a very vivid memory of, it might have not been this first book, it might have been one of the sequels, but me and my friend, we used to make our little like cozy reading space like outside. We'd like put a picnic blanket down and we'll read outside with pillows and make like a little hut. And I remember reading one of these books that is like a zombie apocalyptic book in a very cozy environment. Yeah, fun times. These ones, they're a little hard to part with. I don't know if these are really popular outside of Australia, but I have these Tashi books. Now, I had a whole bunch more that I must have lost over the years. I've moved so much. I was going to keep, there was some I actually had signed. I think it was the first couple in the series because I own here, I've got book 6, book 9, book 11, book 10, and they don't sell them anymore in these individual small volumes. It's all bind-ups now, the way they sell these books. But this was my favorite fantasy series as a kid. I think I read them anywhere from like 6 to 10 years old. I really struggled as a kid with reading. Basically, we found out when I was like 6.5, maybe 7 years old, that I'm like hearing impaired, so I can't hear very well out of my left ear. It took me a long time to learn how to speak properly. I had to do like speech therapy in school, and reading was also very intimidating to me because of that, because they would always say like, you know, pronounce your words. I'm like, can't hear very well, like what are you telling me to do? This series came into my life, I guess, because of a teacher, and I just loved it, and I never felt intimidated because of the size of these books, and they were very accessible, and I loved them because of the fantasy elements as well. Like there's some fun ones, like Haunted House one, we've got demons, Lost City, Royal Tomb, there was like a Baba Yaga's house one. Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I have a lot of fun memories, and I would keep the ones I had that were signed, but I don't know where they are. So yeah, these authors as well were the first ones I ever met. That's kind of cool, isn't it? We always have in school, we would have the MS readathon, and I would always put stickers on a lot of my childhood books of the book I read for the readathon. So this must have been one of the books I read for that readathon. And basically, like, you'd read books and people would give money to you, and then that money would get donated to charity for you to read books. It was such a fun time. So yeah, these books meant a lot to me, and yeah, kind of sad to say goodbye, but I think it's time. I have Orphan Train by Christina Baker Klein. I know I read it, and it's about an Irish immigrant, apparently, Vivian. Oh yeah, okay, now I see. Yeah, because I remember the modern day. It's one of those stories where it's like switches between past and present, and it's about these two characters meeting. I'm getting rid of all these books by Michael Grant. So I have this series, the Gone series. I've only read the first book, and then of course I own the rest of them because that's what teenage Nicole did. And then I actually have read this one as well. This is a book that Michael Grant wrote with Catherine Applegate, Eve and Adam. I read this, I think it was fine, I don't remember much. I have this book that I've been meaning to read since I was 13 years old, and I still haven't read it, and that is Winter Song. I have no idea what this is about. I wanted to read it for that long. I just remember a few of my friends were reading this when I was around 13 and they really enjoyed it. Let's find out what's on the back of it. Okay, so it kind of sounds like a lot of the dystopian books that I read as a teenager. That makes sense. Well, I was probably like interested in it at the time. I have Belle, written by Paula Byrne. I got this from a charity shop because I did like the movie of this, but in hindsight, I don't really want to read this book. Okay, I have this book, The Spook's Apprentice. This is book 1 in a series. I think it's a middle grade series. I have read this, but I never continued on. And I did like it, but I think I read it when I was in my late teens and it felt a bit young. And I wasn't the biggest fan of middle grade in my late teens. I love middle grade more as an adult than I did back then, is what I mean. I also have this book, which I actually think I did read. It's called At the Sign of the Sugared Plum by Mary Hopper. I have a feeling it's about World War I or II. Oh no, I'm lying. It's set in 1665. Oh, it's actually about the plague in London according to the blurb. Maybe I'm wrong and I didn't read this one. I've got these classics. Captain Underpants. I used to love these. I've grown out of this kind of humour, thankfully. Self-development, character development, it's happened. But yeah. These can go. Like, why do I still have these? I have all these books, mostly all by Eden Blyton, except for this top one. This is Treasure Island. But the rest of these all my Eden Blyton books, who was another one of my childhood favorite authors, and I used to love these editions. I love how they match. I still love how they match, like they're really pretty. Should we go through favorites? Obviously the Enchanted Woods, that was always iconic, really. And I also really loved, where is it? The Adventures of Pip. Oh, maybe I don't have it anymore. Oh no, I found it. I lie, I didn't lose it. Here we are. The Adventures of Pip, which is this little brownie dude. In my memory, the spine was red, which is why I couldn't find it just then. I got this book, Shantaran by Gregory David Roberts. Haven't read this. I don't think I will. I think this has recently been adapted, so maybe I will watch the show or movie, whatever it is. I also have this book which is called What It's Like to Go to War. Apparently, according to the back, it's about a guy who was part of the Vietnam War. I just don't want to read this anymore. I got this at one of those discount bookstores. I have this dusty version now of Mulan, which is kind of like a school text in some sort of ways. It's got like all the different versions of Mulan from throughout the years. I got this because one of my videos I did in the past was based on reading this book, and then I read a whole bunch of Mulan retellings in that video. So I brought this book for that video, and it's now served its purpose, and I don't foresee myself reading these versions again, or this book again, so goodbye. I have this book called Beetle Meets Destiny by Gabrielle Williams. This I loved so much, only because it's a book that's set near where I live. This book is set in Melbourne, and I have never, to this day, this is the only book I've ever read set in Melbourne. We really don't have many books existing that are set here. Like, there's a lot of Australian books, but I feel like most of them are set in Sydney and I don't know, maybe the outback, but Melbourne, come on. Where are our Melbourne books? I probably haven't looked very hard, to be fair, but this book I read as a teenager and I really enjoyed. We essentially followed this guy whose name is John Lennon, so everyone calls him Beetle, and he meets a girl called Destiny, and it's just about like their love story. And it was so fun reading this purely because I knew exactly what location they were talking about when they were talking about it in this book. I could picture it all. I've been there myself and it was a lot of fun. I have these couple of books I got as a teenager that I have not read. I got Forsaken, which is book 1 in the Demon Trappers series. Riley has always wanted to be a demon trapper like her father, and she's already following in his footsteps as one of the best, but it's tough being the only girl in an all-guy world, especially when 3 of those guys start making her life more complicated. Oh my god, I wonder what they could be doing. Sorry, I'm in a weird mood today. I have this one, The Dark Heroine. Oh, it's a vampire book. The sexiest romance you'll read this year. According to who? Charismatic but dangerous. Caspar Vaughn. That is how every YA love interest has been described, let's be honest. I must have gotten this in my vampire phase and I never read it, so whoops. I'm getting rid of all my Sarah, is she Sarah or is she a Sarah Shepherd, who of course wrote Pretty Little Liars, and then I also have her other series, The Lying Game. I've watched the TV show of Pretty Little Liars as a teenager and I loved it, of course, and I also did watch the Lying Game TV show. I read most of these. I have Everneath and the 2 sequels, which are these. I read the first book. I never read the sequels. The main character in this is called Nikki, and I get called Nikki a lot, so I think that's why I also originally wanted to pick it up. This is like a Hades and Persephone retelling, I think, which I didn't know that when I read this when I was like 15. I found out years later and I always wanted to go back and give it another go, but it just hasn't happened, and I just might read this eventually. Like, I can see me potentially rereading these, or at least the first book, rereading it for maybe a video, but I don't want to own them. Like, there are books in here that I think I might read or reread down the track, but the likelihood of it is sort of slim. So I don't want to own these books just for the sake of hanging on to them in case. I don't have room for that. If I had room for that, I would totally hang on to them. I would be such a hoarder if I was rich, I'm not gonna lie. Okay, I have this series, which, I don't know, it's a bit of a throwback. Across the Universe by Beth Revis. I did read the entire trilogy. I finished it, so I think I liked it. Okay, I have this series by Robinson Wells. I think it's about kids who are like locked up in their school and they try and run away. I also have these dystopian books that I did read. The first one's Eve, then these are the sequels. I read this. It was very average. I think this was kind of Handmaidens-esque kind of story. I have Boy Overboard by Maurice Clayton. This is a book I had to read in year 6. And I still learn it. Beautiful Disaster by Jamie Maguire. I did not like this book. I read this, I want to say I read this at like 18. The main guy calls his girlfriend Pigeon. I can still remember that and hating that. I have this book, Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist. I think I got this because I really liked the Eli and Naomi's No Kiss list. I really like that book, and it's by the same 2 authors. I found it in a charity shop, wanted to read it because of that other book, but yeah, never read this. Don't know if I will. I haven't seen the adaptation either. Like, what's wrong with me? I've done that for so many books in this pile. And then I have this book, This Song Will Save Your Life. I really did like this one when I read it. I read it quite a while ago. It's essentially about a girl who like almost commits suicide. Like she's thinking about attempting, and she rings up someone at school. I think from memory it's someone that she's not particularly close to, like they're friendly but not her closest friend, and she kind of like tells her, and so almost attempt is interrupted because that friend, that person she knows that she rings, contacts her parents, and then it's kind of her just trying to adjust to life and trying to navigate life, and she finds a lot of comfort in DJing. Like that's what this book is kind of about, her like self-discovery journey and her DJing. And I really like this. I wasn't what I expected it when I picked it up. I think I went into it very blind, but I enjoyed it and I thought it was a very deep story, and I think I picked it up at the time I needed it. It was good, but I don't think I will reread. This is another random book from childhood, The Sisters Club. I don't have sisters. I always wanted a sister, and I think I used to just like fill the void of not having a sister by reading books like these or finding stuff like this. I read this book in, it must have been 2019, my first year in Booktube, because I know this was in a vlog and I think it was in one of my Reading Rush vlogs. So yeah, a bit of a throwback, but this is the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. I quite like this. It's all told in letters and there's all these different people writing letters, so I thought it was interesting because it was like we got a whole bunch of characters, but it was very accessible with how the POVs were done because it was just like letter writing, so it's easy to keep track of who was who. I've decided I'm going to leave this video here for today. It looks like I haven't made a dent. It really doesn't look any different to when I started filming this video. But we got to remember I did work on the sides today of the couch, not this area. If you made it this far, leave me the peace sign emoji. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this part 2. Look forward to part 3. If there's anything else you want me to do differently in these videos, like want me to talk less, want me to talk more, let me know. I would love to hear your opinions. That's it for now. I really hope you're enjoying whatever you're currently reading, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye.